Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Mark Turi, and it's good to be here this week. I hope everyone has been having a good week. Just want to shout out, of course, Shell. Thanks for being here. There you go. And earlier we had Power Lines come on and talk about the Cisco kid. We're going to get into that in a moment. But yeah, thanks everyone who is here now and will be watching live, of course, if you are also on the replay. As I always mention at the top of my show, do not forget to like this video if you haven't already, and please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. We do a lot of different content on my channel. Um, of course, the last couple weeks we've been doing a lot of philosophy. Of course, last week before last, I met with Marilyn Honig. We talked about tribalism, which we've also talked about on this channel. Last week, we talked about the ideas of knowledge and morals and where they come from and so on. And I've been very, very happy with doing this content because a lot of people do enjoy it. I get a lot of good feedback in the comments, and just again, very appreciative of everyone who's joining us and will join us. But again, if there's anything you want or like, or some kind of topic or such, uh, don't forget, of course, that you can always leave a comment. I like to get back to my comments as soon as possible and as much as possible. So don't forget to do that. But just before we get into tonight's topic, which, as you know from the title of this episode, I am going to get into my top 10 favorite episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Last month, I did my favorite episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, which for me, it's hard, very hard to put Deep Space Nine at number two as my favorite Star Trek show, only because I have a much more personal history with Star Trek The Next Generation, and I will get into my history of watching Deep Space Nine in a moment. But before I get into that, just some small talk. I think it was sort of worldwide news here in Hungary over the past couple of weeks. Um, I don't think I talked about it last week, if I'm not mistaken, but maybe I did. Now I can never remember. But the Hungarian government decided to cancel slash ban the uh, LGBTQ plus Pride Parade, which takes place every year annually. I think it's April or sometime in the summer in Budapest. Um, so that I think that made some headlines. I know a lot of people who were in Canada, my family and friends were, um, you know, texting me and so forth. So that's kind of been a big of a hoopla. There's been a lot of protests going on over the past little while. Some of them small, some of them rather large. And I am not someone who has been to a protest or done any actual activism in years, probably since I was in college. But the situation is sort of tempting me because I belong to one of the political parties here in Hungary that is, not a part of the government, not a part of the government coalition. And I might actually go and join some stuff events in the next coming weeks, which I think, again, for someone like myself who generally tends to be pretty cynical. I'm a Hungarian. We tend to be kind of pessimistic, even kind of apathetic, to be honest with you. Kind of like, well, it's pointless. What are you going to do? And I'm kind of like, come on. Um, so, in case people don't know, the Budapest Pride is been going on for years, a long, long time, at least a couple decades, and there's never been any violence or any vandalism or anything. They're always peaceful. Maybe the one thing you could say is that they're loud, but then again, so are all parades. Not any louder than I've been to prides in Toronto and Los Angeles and, other places too, so it's not like they'd be any different. So noise pollution may be okay, but, you know yeah, they decided to be canceled because of the children, because the government says that it's a negative influence on children, which is also why they have banned, uh, books and education on gender and sexuality to children. Again, I really hope this is not political because it isn't political. I kind of look at these issues as going beyond politics. So hopefully that won't be too, interpreted. If you have a different opinion, again, it's all good. You're all welcome on my channel. But I just wanted to sort of mention that because it's been very frustrating, and especially if you've heard about that, if you're living in another part of Europe or another part of the world, including Canada or the United States, of course, you may have heard of it. You may have heard what's Hungary, maybe just some whispers here and there, but you know, that's kind of the big thing here, which is very unfortunate. It's very, very sad, and one of the tragedy or tragic reasons behind this is that a lot of people throughout Europe and the Middle East and North Africa go come to Budapest Pride Parade because it's in proximity to some of the neighboring countries, including the Russian Federation and so forth, where homosexuality and transgender and the LGBTQA plus community or IA plus community is not exactly welcome. There's a lot of discrimination, personal discrimination, political discrimination. So a lot of people come from Romania, Bulgaria, North Macedonia, and as I said, Russia, and so forth, and also again from the Middle East and from North Africa. And it's usually just a few days or a week or something, but people can kind of at least be out, and it's just very frustrating for me and very disillusioning, and also very disconcerting. So I just wanted to keep that going. Before I go on to an announcement, I do want to say hello to Irish Mart. And thank you so much for being here. There was Shell, excuse me. There's Irish Mart. I clicked the one above you, Irish. I apologize. And Clearwater Chad. So today we've got Mark Postle, number 1, number 3, and number 5. All of the oddballs are here. We got 1, 3, and 5. And I couldn't be happier and prouder to have all y'all. So thank you, Chad, for stopping in. Again, I in the next, I'll give you my announcement because the next couple of weeks are going to be pretty busy for me. So I'm not 100% whether or not I'll be having shows in the next couple of weeks. But again, please, always go to my community tab and stuff like this, just because the next couple of weeks I have some deadlines that are very important. And I may end up doing one, for example, and not another one, or something like this. But I'll have to let you know. My April is going to be a slightly busier than it was this month, particularly with deadlines. But again, I'll just let you know. But I still think, Chad, I still think we got to get a Griff and Pete have a powwow and a conference sooner or later, at least. Anyway, um, yeah. So again, just sort of, I'll mention all this at the end of the live, but just not certain right now whether or not I'll be able to do lives next week, the week after. After that, though, like after, let me look at the calendar. After the week of April 20th, or even after that, I might actually go live twice. I'm not even sure what I'll do, but I'll have a little bit more flexibility, and especially into next month, or I should say into May. Well, I'll probably get back on a regular channel, and we'll figure out some timings and days and times. But again, until then, all this stuff is just temporary because it's just busy with deadlines for a number of stuff that I'm doing. But yeah, that's really it. Again, thank you everyone who supports the channel, because I know sometimes it's I'd really like to be here all the time, especially once a week or more. And I know that a lot of you have, been with me since last August when I started the channel. I was doing a little bit more content. Of course, I still want to do more videos with Marilyn, and I'm going to seek out once the spring comes. I'm going to seek out other people. So actually, if there's any other YouTube creators in the SPTV space or otherwise who you'd like me to contact, we have our friend Brian from A Poet. I've done lives with him. I will do more with Marilyn, but I haven't really done too many others. I'd like to. I've been trying to get, or would like to, I should say, get a stream going with Holly, the Scientology geek. She was really interesting. We did a live with her, Joe and Chad last year. So I'm going to try to reach out a little bit more, but with time and everything as it is, at the moment it's a bit more difficult. So just until then, again, just bear with me, as I say, just for the next couple weeks, and then by the time May comes, I'm going to try to increase my content. So anyway, that's just all small talk and things that I'll bring up at the end of the show as well. But okay, let's get our our hands dirty, so to speak. This is why we're all here today. Is to talk about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, one of my favorite television shows of all time. As I said earlier, it's very difficult to put it at number two. Um, Star Trek: The Next Generation is just always going to be number one as far as specific Star Trek shows for me, because again, it's the one that I watched when I was a kid and as a teenager. As I mentioned last month, I told you all about how they would air the reruns on the local Fox station, which comes out of Buffalo, whichever one that was, WADD, WUBT, WUTV, I think it is. Anyway, and with Star Trek Deep Space Nine premiered in January 3rd of 1993. So I was 9 years old, going into 10 years old, and it ended in 1999 when I was 16. So I would say the themes, very similarly to the Next Generation, were over my head, right? From 10 to 16 years old. Um, I wasn't exactly thinking about those kinds of things. From 1996 until about 2010, I didn't have the best opinion of Deep Space Nine. I mentioned before as well that in Canada, we had this station called Space, it was called. Now it's called CTV Sci-Fi. And how during the days they would have they would air one episode of the of the original series, then the Next Generation, then Deep Space Nine, then Voyager. And so I remember on Space, um, they would air Deep Space Nine marathons during the holidays. Um, and I would watch them one-off episodes, and some of them are pretty hit and miss. I will say though that I remember watching like the last couple of episodes live when they were airing. So I did watch the Deep Space Nine finale when it aired when I was 16. So I had missed a lot of Deep Space Nine up until that point, of course. And then during the reruns up until around 2010, 2011, I didn't have a very positive view. I thought it was very boring. Um, you'd watch one episode, you kind of roll your eyes, the Ferengi, what the. But in 2011, um, and I think I also mentioned this last month as well, Netflix had, I think they bought the rights at that time to all the Star Trek series and put them on Netflix to binge. And I think I mentioned that summer, or that year, I should say, I binge watched all of the original series, then all of the Next Generation, and then all of Deep Space Nine. And I got to tell you, after watching that, so in 2011, I was 28 years old. Certainly, I think the time itself had had given me enough where I understood more of the darker themes, the more mature adult themes of Deep Space Nine, because it's not the same. TOS was a bit corny. It's 1960s. There's still some good episodes and drama, of course. I really love City on the Edge of Forever and so forth. The Next Generation, it's more positive. It's more glossy. It's definitely lighter. Literally, I mean, the lighting on the bridge and everywhere else is bright. They have, of course, I mentioned as the last time, they do have dark episodes, 100%. They have horror episodes, but Deep Space Nine gets into the moral gray area of the Federation and Starfleet, internal conflicts, and just a whole bunch of wonderful, wonderful things. And I think since 2011, and I just like every year I try to watch some Deep Space Nine. So, somehow I think I've binged it around 7 or 8 times since 2011. I remember doing it also in like 2015, then like 16 or 17, and then of course during COVID, I think I binge watched it twice in one year, twice in 2020, and maybe once or twice in 2021. And so I try to do it once a year, or at least I binge uh, like The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. And Deep Space Nine is one I love it. I hate when it's over, basically. I absolutely hate when it's over, but it's also a really good finale, which is very, very um, much the case with the Next Generation. But for me, as I said, it's kind of grown on me. What I love about it are those dark themes and those more sort of adult themes, if you want to say, and maturity, and they deal with terrorism, war, racism, religion, science, discrimination, you know, a whole occupation, resistance. Um, they deal with a lot of stuff, and I absolutely love the characters and the cast. So let's just get into it right away. So, when we talk about my top 10 favorite episodes, it's the same that I talked about last month. Are these the best? Some of them will be, I guess, and some of them won't be. I hope, obviously, I've made a good list that people enjoy. you know, um, please understand that I was going to put an honorables mentions list, but my honorable mentions list got to more than 10. And so I said, well, forget it, because what's the point? Then I would do a top 20 and we'd be here for hours. And then if I did another, honorable mention and so forth. So I have to tell you, I could easily do a top 50 of episodes easily. And I think of the episodes that like I don't like, there's actually not that many. There are some that are either just okay. There are a few that aren't so good, but it doesn't really matter. I think it's um, sort of one of those things here. You know what I mean. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just, as I start this, I'm going to put this to full screen, which means I won't be able to see the comments. But after every couple of slides, I will go back to the comments. Please leave comments if you'd like. Let me know what some of your favorite episodes are. Let me know about what you think about my list and so on. So, before we get into that, of course, I just wanted to show a picture here of Deep Space Nine. On my channel, you can look back on my videos list. I did an entire couple hours with Marilyn and her husband and with the Nerdy Bunch about a year and a half ish ago, where we sort of got into the whole beginning of the series. So I don't want to go over too much of that. But this is the space station Deep Space Nine. It begins with Benjamin Sisko, who's a commander, later a captain, taking over this station, which used to be part of the Cardassian Empire, and then recently became part of the Bajorans and Federations and so forth. Again, for fans of the show, you sort of know if you watched Adversary, which is or the Emissary, which is the first couple episodes, you'll know the story. And then here's the cast. This is a later cast because we have Worf, who I think comes in around season 4. Anyway, season 4, season 5. And just to introduce to you, we see here that there are 3 rows of 3 people. So if we go from the back row first, who are standing, we see Lieutenant Commander Worf, who is the Klingon in the sash and the red uniform in the far left background. In the middle background is Dr. Julian Bashir, the medical officer, lieutenant. Then we have Security Chief Odo, who's in the brown with the makeup. He's a changeling. In the middle, in the yellow gold uniform, is Chief Miles O'Brien. We're going to talk about him because he's got an episode that I really love that's about him. Next to him is the Ferengi. That's of course the the owner of the bar, Quark's, named Quark, owner of Quark's Bar, who is Ferengi and does a lot of scheming. Next to him in the middle on the right is Kira, Major than Colonel Kira. She is my absolute favorite character. Her and Miles are my 2 favorite characters of top 3 favorite characters in Star Trek, period. And she has a hell of a lot to do in this show. She's amazing. Nana Visitor's fantastic. And they put her through the ringer. And I think, again, she's probably my number 2 favorite character next to Captain Picard, who is my favorite. At the bottom left, we have Jadzia Dax, who is a Trill. And her and Worf, who standing above her, get married in later seasons. In the bottom middle, we have, this is now Captain in this photo, Captain Benjamin Sisko, previously, of course, Commander Benjamin Sisko. And then next to him, on the bottom right, is his son, Jake Sisko. And again, just wanted to sort of introduce you to some of the cast and crew here just briefly. I hope, again, I hope if you haven't seen the show, and whether you are or aren't a Star Trek fan, I do hope that you do end up at least watching some episodes, whether they're these episodes or other episodes that you find online. So let's get into number 10 here. So my number 10 favorite episode is called Nor the Battle to the Strong. It's from season 5, episode 4. And on the left, as I did with TNG, I've taken these very short synopsises, or synopsises, I don't know how you say it, from IMDb, and then I've given a photo in reference to the episode. So the IMDb description says Jake, reporting from the front lines, sees what war truly is. So one of the reasons I really like this episode quite a bit, and why I put it at my number 10 and in my top 10, is because it is a Jake Sisko centered episode, which there are not that many of, particularly after the middle part of the series, especially towards the Dominion War. I mean, Jake Sisko, I think he's 13 or 14 in the first season, supposed to be around there. And, obviously he grows into a young man. By the end of it, I guess he'd be close to 20. And yeah, there's really not too much with him. There is another episode called The Visitor, which I also really like. That might be like number 11 or 12, but it has to do with sort of Jake in the future and an alternative timeline, played by the late great Tony Todd, who passed away last year. But in this episode, which again is focused on Jake, he and Dr. Bashir get a distress call from a Federation Starfleet outpost on a planet. And There, at this point in the series, in season 5, the early part of season 5, the Federation is actually at war with the Klingons. And the war itself is pretty minor. It doesn't last. The Klingons then soon join the Federation in their, during the Dominion War. The Klingons are actually quite notable for participating in the Dominion War and assaults on the Dominion War. So this is like a little kind of pointless kind of skirmish. So Dr. Bashir, of course, goes down. He's a doctor, so he goes to help these people, the wounded in this outpost. And Jake, who at this point doesn't want, he's already expressed that he doesn't want to join Starfleet. He wants to become a writer. And I really kind of think that this is like Jake is kind of like becomes a war reporter in the vein of someone like Ernest Hemingway. And if you don't know, American writer, author Ernest Hemingway was a war reporter on the Italian front in World War One, and then he also went to Spain during the Civil War in the 1930s, and he wrote a book called "For Whom the Bell Tolls." Maybe some of you read it in high school or something. I like this book. I think it's actually very interesting, which is about the Republicans who are, trying to take over a town that's occupied by the Nationalists, and a lot of it is based on Hemingway's own life story. And there's other war reporters, of course, especially during the Second World War and so forth, that we could be reminded of. But Jake kind of turns into Hemingway, and there's a lot of narratives in this one, a lot of voiceover narratives from Jake. The particular climax of this episode is that the Klingons do break through the perimeter and do attack the outpost, and Jake has to defend himself. The photo, which is now on the right here, is a kind of a famous photo of the episode. At least Jake and Bashir get lost during I guess, a bombardment. I think a mortar bombardment by the Klingons, and Jake gets lost and finds himself in this foxhole with this gentleman who's on the right, who's like an older veteran. He's like a Master Chief Petty Officer, and he's a soldier essentially, and sort of, you know gives some really great dialogue between him about war and sort of the futility of it. And in the end, it is futile because again, this is like, you know, didn't really matter. Um, and a lot of people had suffered and died, and Jake was, there giving his first person and reports. But in the end, they sort of clear up everything with the Klingons and go about their day. But I really like this one. Again, if you're interested in like war journalism, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Vietnam. And so if you've ever seen the movie We Were Soldiers, Barry Pepper's character, and I've forgotten the guy's name, played a journalist who, experienced what was called the Battle of the Ia Drang Valley. And so it sort of reminds me of that as well, especially with some of the tactics of the Klingon. It's kind of like guerrilla warfare, and especially the outpost is kind of like a fire base. Anyway, it's a really interesting episode. Again, you've got a lot of drama, you've got some narratives, you've got some action, and so forth. So one that I really like also as a historian, because war reporting I find is, obviously quite important. So that's number 10, Nor the Battle to the Strong. That's from season 5, episode 4. The next one is more lighthearted. Again, Deep Space Nine can get pretty dark. It can get pretty deep, but it's also really funny at times, and very lighthearted. So this one is number 9. This is The Magnificent Ferengi. This is from season 6, episode 10. The IMDb description says, at the request of the Grand Nagus, Quark puts together a mission to rescue Quark's mother, Moogie, who is in the hands of the Dominion. So in this episode, we're getting towards the Dominion War. The Grand Nagus, by the way, for those who aren't as familiar with Star Trek culture and lore as some of us here, is the head of the Ferengi Alliance, and he is a family member, of course. Ends up marrying Quark's mother in later later episodes, played by Wallace Shawn. And the Dominion kidnaps Moogie, who is, of course, Quark and Rom's mother. Rom is a recurring character. Quark is a part of the main cast, as you saw in the photo. And so the Quark, his brother Rom, and his nephew Nog, who you can see here in the photo on the right, hire three other uh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, there's six here. There's actually, yeah. They hire three other Ferengi kind of mercenaries in order to do a prisoner exchange and a ransom exchange, where they are to meet a group of Jem'Hadar and a Vorta on a station called Empok Nor, which is a replica of Deep Space Nine, abandoned somewhere out, near Cardassia. And so the Ferengis go there. They themselves have a Vorta that they have to exchange with Moogie. They end up accidentally killing the Vorta, and there's hilarity ensues. It's reminds me a little bit of like a Three Stooges, kind of special with if you've ever seen the movie Clue with Tim Curry, Christopher Lloyd, and so forth, where there's a lot of running around back and forth. It's very farcical, very slapstick, and even though there is some action and violence in it's actually one of the funniest, I think, comedy of errors episodes of Deep Space Nine that brings levity because right here as the series goes on into season 6, they're in the war, and again they do have kind of a dark kind of a tone that gets synced in here. Just want to say hello to Apostle number 4, Mark Apostle number 4, Peter Anderson. Good to see you, my friend. And I will continue on. So again, Magnificent Ferengi. It's just a very funny one. I think. I also think it's the best Ferengi-based episode. There's a lot of bad ones. This is the one thing about the Ferengi is they give them like a couple dozen like Quark Ferengi kind of episodes. This one is for sure the best. There was another one that again would be in an honorable mention. It's called Little Green Men, where Nog, Rom, and Quark accidentally go back in time to 1947 and are basically the aliens from Roswell. So that's another one that's kind of like nice and lighthearted. I was going to put that on here, and then I remembered this one, and I was like, no, this is the one. Look out if you have seen this. Look out for the fact that one of the Vortas is played by Iggy Pop, who's of course the famous rock musician from I guess like the 70s and 80s. And I don't think he does acting very much, but he played a Vorta in this one, and he's actually really good. Again, it's a really, really interesting, really kind of, um, funny kind of slapstick episode, and one that again brings some levity. So number 9 for me is the Magnificent Ferengi, season 6, episode 10. So now we go on to number 8. And number 8 is a two-parter. And this is the Maquis, parts 1 and 2 from season 2, episodes 20 and 21. So that's at the end of the second season. The IMDb description for the Maquis Part 1 episode says, the destruction of a Cardassian ship leads Sisko, Dukat, and Sisko's old friend, Cal Hudson, to the fact that there is an unofficial war between the Maquis and the Cardassians. The next one, number 2, part 2, says Sisko tries to resolve the Maquis crisis by preventing a war, freeing Gul Dukat, and offering the defected Hudson a chance to return. Some people I know, didn't really like the Maquis timeline or the Maquis thing, which I do. In case if you don't know, the Maquis timeline plays out in the Next Generation with an episode that I mentioned in my previous PowerPoint called Preemptive Strike. It then goes on. They also with Lower Decks, I think too, maybe in Lower Decks. Anyway, for sure in Preemptive Strike, it takes a really really big meaty part here in Deep Space Nine, and then the very first episode of Voyager. For those, of course, who know Voyager, Caretakers Part One and Two, what Voyager is doing before they get caught in that wormhole that sends them to the Delta Quadrant is they are fighting the Maquis. And of course, we know that Chakotay and B'Elanna and a number of crew members are former Maquis, uh, fighters or whatever you want to call them, terrorist fighters, and they of course become absorbed into the crew of Voyager. So they become a stable part of that. So across three series, we have the Maquis. The story behind it, I think, is again really interesting as an allegory, sort of historical allegory. So when the Cardassians, the Bajorans, and the Federation were able to secure a treaty that ended the Cardassian occupation of Bajor, there was an area of space which belonged to the Federation that had previously, in decades past, belonged to the Cardassians, and they were returned to the Cardassians. Of course, these planets had colonists and settlers that were Federation citizens. We also see that in an episode of The Next Generation. It's the one where Wesley Crusher leaves with the Traveler. I forget the name of that one, but they were going on to this planet which had been settled by Native Americans, First Nations, indigenous peoples, and of course, there's a lot of historical, um, allegory to treaties of the indigenous peoples in North South America and worldwide with colonial powers. And so the Maquis, for example, were kind of this organized force that resisted this treaty. Now they're Federation citizens, but they're not Starfleet, and most of them were civilians that were organized into cells. Ro Laren becomes one. Thomas Riker will become one. There's a Deep Space Nine episode about that. And in these two episodes, Sisko is reunited with his friend, Lieutenant Commander Cal Hudson, who becomes the liaison to the Federation in these outer colonies, which they're called. And Hudson, is trying his best to be the liaison between the Federation, the colonists, and the Cardassians to ensure that the colonists will leave what is then going to be Cardassian space. And well, it turns out that the Maquis, they kidnap Gul Dukat, and of course, Cal Hudson becomes a very successful or prominent, I would say, member of the Maquis, sort of turning his back on his career and turning his back on his friendship with Captain Sisko. And it's one of these things where um, I'm going to mention this because later I'm not going to spoil what my number one is, but I will mention this again, which is that it's a sci-fi show. It's about aliens in a spaceship, a space station, and the dialogue that they give these actors just is kind of absurd when you think about it. But the allegory, the writing, the performances, like everything just makes it so interesting. I don't know. I've always loved these two episodes. They later will go on to talk more about the Maquis with a character named Michael Eddington and so forth. And not a lot of people like him. I do. Again, I like that kind of stuff. He portrays, Sisko, and he gives a lot of references to Les Miserables. Eddington does, but anyway, I enjoy it because of its historical allegory, and the performances, the writing, and again, it's just a space show with people talking about planets that don't really exist and people that don't really exist, and yet I find it so intriguing. That's just me. So I hope everyone else enjoys it too. And let me know if you are a fan of the Maquis. Let me know. I certainly understand, sympathize with their cause, but in the end, what happens, of course, is they do get destroyed. Cal Hudson later dies off screen, so Cisco is told that he died in some skirmish later on, and then of course Eddington and his wife and a whole bunch of people. They're on this planet, they escape and whatnot, but the Maquis just dissolves, within the next couple seasons, and then they kick into the Dominion War. But anyway, I enjoyed it. So as I said, I really love Preemptive Strike. That's one of my favorite episodes where Ro becomes Maquis. So this is just one of the origins and meteor episodes of that. Number 7 um, is Far Beyond the Stars. It's from season 6, episode 13. Again, another one that I think is a fan favorite for a lot of people. Maybe a little low on this list according to some people, which will be fine. But I really do love this episode. There were 6 others I liked a little more, but regardless, Far Beyond the Stars is the episode where, through some kind of incident, the Benjamin Sisko and the crew, um, I, it's kind of like the Inner Light. I forget now, and someone can remind me on how they actually get to this place. But it's basically them and the crew, and they're back in like the 1950s. And here it says from the description, um, Captain Sisko has a full sensory vision of himself as an underappreciated science fiction writer, magazine writer in 1950s America. So it's one of these episodes where the entire cast is in it, but they're playing their past selves. So, like for example, the actor who plays Nog is not in makeup and whatever. And so Cisco is a writer. He's the only African American writer for this astonishing science fiction magazine, and he's struggling to come up with ideas. And he comes up with the idea of Deep Space Nine, which is, of course, a space station run by a black captain, an African American captain, commanding officer. And this is a really, really important, I think, story due to the fact that um, from season 6, episode 13. So this would have aired um, middle to late 90s. So not 30 plus years after the civil rights movement and the ending of Jim Crow. And it really takes a look again at racism really, really deeply, because when he submits the story of Benjamin Sisko, the captain, and of the space station, again, the people can't edit, or they can't publish it, and so forth. But what I think what's really interesting about this episode is there's this very famous monologue that Avery Brooks, which I think this is probably his best performance, at least one of his best performances in the whole series, where he says, "I'm a human being. Um, I created it. I created this. They're real. I created it. I'm a human being." It's very, very good. Incredible drama. It's a period piece. Again, I've kind of forgotten now how they actually get into this particular thing. I think maybe it's the prophets or something. Anyway, it doesn't really matter how they get in and out of this particular 1950s kind of, because it's not a holosuite, but it kind of looks like one. But I'll just remember that for telling this very important story only a couple decades after the civil rights movement in America, and plus the fact that Avery Brooks himself, he's the very, very first African American uh, commanding officer of a space station who had the lead in a Star Trek show. Now before that, in the original series, there was a few admirals and commodores that were African American, particularly in a I think it's Commodore Stone, if I'm not mistaken, from an episode called um, oh gosh, Court Martial. I'm pretty sure that's the gentleman's name. In the original series, there's also Richard Daystrom, who's an African American gentleman who comes on and to upgrade the computer of the Enterprise. So there's that, and then of course there are African American and other admirals and captains and so forth throughout the Next Generation and some of the movies. But this is the star, and again, not that long after civil rights. So anyway, very good episode. Again, known for its drama, known for its views on racism, and I think in some ways it was kind of showing like, okay, this is how far we've come in the 30 some years, but that there's still a lot more to go. And of course, we've seen that recently within the past, you know, half decade, decade of relations and race relations and so forth. So again, a really good one. I would also say too, probably if someone has never seen Star Trek Deep Space Nine, because it's not really about the station and it's not, it's not really about anything too specific. I think just to say like, hey, like here's the writing, here's the acting, and you can give this one to someone for a little taste, which I think would be interesting. Just to pop in here. One of the reasons Far Beyond the Stars was great was seeing the actors. Yes, out of there exactly. They had the gentleman who plays Gowron, Odo, who's the late Rene Auberjonois. He, of course, was the editor. No makeup. Michael Dorn was without makeup. Again, the gentleman Robert Riley, who played Gowron, is out of makeup. Aaron Eisenberg, who we're going to talk about later, is out of makeup. He plays Nog. And Armin Shimmerman, who plays Quark, is out of makeup and so forth. So yeah, that was a very interesting one. And then yeah, this is good sci-fi, not like that cry. L. Ron Hubbard. Ooh, yikesy doodle. Ooh. Yeah. Not a good sci-fi writer, L. Ron Hubbard. Anywho, and that again, Far Beyond the Stars. Okay, so the next one, um, because I absolutely love and cherish Chief Miles O'Brien. He's again up there again, and might now be my top five characters. Picard, Kira, I'd say O'Brien, and a couple of others I'm going to mention later. A lot of Deep Space Nine. I love these characters. I like Riker, of course, is also one of my favorites, but Miles O'Brien is awesome. Of course, we know for us Star Trek fans, Miles O'Brien is he's a reoccurring character throughout the Next Generation. He's at Encounter on Farpoint. He goes through different ranks and different positions until he's finally solidified near the middle seasons of the Next Generation as an enlisted personnel. I mentioned, of course, that I really loved his episode "The Wounded," which he does with Bob Grunin, the USS Phoenix, Captain Benjamin Maxwell, again with the Cardassians and so forth. So he's the glue that links these two shows together, because of course Miles goes from the Enterprise to Deep Space Nine and takes over as chief of operations. In this episode, which is a powerhouse performance from Colm Meaney, who is just an excellent, excellent actor with an amazing performance. So, Hard Time, season 4, episode 18. O'Brien tries to reintegrate to life on the station after serving 20 years in a virtual prison. In this episode, Miles is caught. I believe he's on some kind of a mission or was traveling or something happened, and he's on this planet, and he's sort of wired in like the Matrix to a program, and in his mind, he is thrown in prison into a very small cell where he has a cellmate, and over the next what he feels is 20 years, which I think is only a matter of days or weeks in actual real life. Again, kind of like the Inner Light. In the Inner Light, I think it was only like a few minutes, was actually like 40 years. In this case, it's very similar. So in this episode, Miles is obviously very distraught, and he and his cellmate, who is an alien, have a conflict over food, and it's very emotionally stressful. Of course, they find what happens to Miles, and they break him out, so to speak, by turning off the program. He sort of comes to, and the crew is there, and he's very um, obviously very stressed out about it and shocked and surprised. So now he has to go back to Deep Space Nine and readjust to his life. And the one thing I will say that I kind of wish that the writers or something is to mention this again, because this is like this sort of one-off episode where it's a Miles based episode, and then like the next episode, like everything's back to normal, and I think he'd have some lingering feelings of PTSD. That's the only thing I don't like about it. I think it would be higher if they mentioned you know the events of this episode, at least even later, like even once would have been interesting. Because it's such a powerful episode, and his again, Call Meany O'Brien's performance is just it's incredible. It's absolutely amazing. So this is the episode where, if you've seen it, Miles has again he's got PTSD, and he's just working to try to forget what happened, and he's recalling some memories. Obviously, he's getting traumatized and so re-traumatized, and he ends up having like a big shouting match with Keiko, his wife, and their daughter Molly, where he like grabs Molly and kind of is like shaking her. And the image on the right is when Miles runs from his quarters into a cargo bay, where he takes a phaser and he's going to unalive himself. And Dr. Bashir, who's been with him, who's been trying to help him, get this transition, kind of, calms him down and so forth. And again, I wanted to hear something else. Anyway, that was my 2 cents on that one. But if you are a fan of Chief O'Brien, this is a really devastating episode. It is very dark, if you can imagine, just being in a program where you think that you've spent 20 years in a prison, in a small prison cell with very limited food, and so forth. And then all of a sudden, it's only a few days or something that's gone by. Like, again, it's like the Inner Light in that sense, where time is kind of, relative, I guess, in one sense, and manipulated. And I really feel sorry for O'Brien. Um, and then his decision to, unalive himself at the end, but is then talked down. It's just great. And again, I just wanted to hear one more reference to this episode, which is really just kind of a shame, I think. But I really, really love this one. And yes, that's right. I guess spoiler alerts. Obviously, we're getting. I apologize for not saying that earlier, but yes, he kills his cellmate over food. But of course, the cellmate is not real, so you know what I mean. But he does do that, and so that leads him into more psychological, pain. All right, let's go on to number five. Number five, I'm cheating a little bit because technically this is, but also isn't a two-part episode. But I don't care. This is my presentation. So it's not like part one, part two, but it's two parts. And these are the episodes of Homefront and Paradise Lost, which is season four, episodes 10 and 11. The IMDb description for Homefront is that Cisco travels to Earth when a bombing at a Federation conference is determined to be the work of a changeling. And Paradise Lost, the next episode, when Starfleet institutes martial law to combat the changeling menace, Cisco begins to question if the Dominion is the real threat. Again, one of the reasons that I think Deep Space Nine is so interesting is because it is not like the original series, and it is not like the Next Generation, although the Next Generation kind of gets a little bit into some conspiratorial, areas. But, I mean, The Undiscovered Country also did get into some kind of conspiracy sort of areas. But this is really like, okay, well, when there's a war going on, and a potential threat, Earth, which is supposed to be paradise, is not actually paradise anymore. And so all it really takes is the threat, an external threat, to ruin what would be a paradise. Okay. So this is the episode, these two, which again I am including as a two-parter, has a lot to do with civil liberties and at what cost do we surrender those civil liberties in the name of security. So as you see here from the descriptions, I'll just go through it. There's a changeling, there's a Federation conference, and there's a bomb goes off, kills a bunch of important Federation council peoples and so forth. And just before it's videotaped, and just before they notice that there's a changeling, there's kind of a shape, something changes, and so they know that the changelings have made it to Earth. And of course, the changeling changes shape, just like Odo does. So who is the changeling? Um, and throughout the series, or throughout these two episodes, Cisco, and this is the image here. I'll describe the image here on the right. This is Cisco's father, played brilliantly by Brock Peters, wonderful actor. And he owns a restaurant in New Orleans, Louisiana, Creole restaurant. And during the first and sort of second of these episodes, what they want to do, the Institute has to find, or the Federation has to find who this changeling is, because it's been impersonating admirals and so forth. Admiral Layton, for example. And they're going to receive blood tests. So there's this enacting of martial law. And these Federation security officers that you can see here in the gold yellow uniform on the right are going around to the restaurant where Cisco's family owns, and they're testing people for blood. If you've ever seen, and I kind of think this is an indirect reference, but if you've ever seen 1982 movie John Carpenter's The Thing, there's a blood scene in that one with the shapeshifter. I think that there might be some parallel to that. I don't know, but I think it's very interesting anyway. Um, and of course, the Grandpa Cisco says, I am real. I am who I am. I don't want to submit to these things. It's really brilliant just to see that the Federation itself is just like every other institution. When there's a threat from an outside force, people look within, they get paranoid, they turn on themselves, and really, you know, it's not as much of a utopia as we once thought. And that's again one of the reasons why I absolutely love Deep Space Nine, because it humanizes the Federation. It's not as idealistic. In the end, of course, by the way, just like most of Star Trek, they find the changeling, things kind of return back to normal, but they have this precarious set of events that really question the morality of the Federation. And I also like Odo in an early episode, I think from season 1 or 2, talks about resisting Federation dogma, and how Cisco once says, I think it's Cisco who says once, that it's easy to be a saint in paradise, but we don't live in paradise all the way out here in the frontier and so forth. And so, really, Deep Space Nine, a lot of people don't like Deep Space Nine for this reason, that it's darker, it's on a space station, it's morally ambiguous. But that's what I didn't like originally, until, of course, I realized, oh, okay, yes, it has all of these things, but in the end, the Federation will, kind of be preserved. I will give you another spoiler alert. I don't really have any episodes that mention Section 31. There's a bunch of them with the great William Sadler who plays Sloan. So there are really great episodes with Dr. Bashir and Sloan and so forth. And of course, there was a Section 31 movie that was just around. I haven't seen that movie, but with Section 31, they are an intelligence wing that really does the dirty tricks of the Federation, where they are a part of the Federation, but they're not really a part of the Federation, and they're kind of autonomous and so forth. And so, Deep Space Nine gets into this, that really the only way that Star Trek is so peaceful is because there are people doing the dirty work, and it's again why some people just don't like Deep Space Nine, but to me it makes sense, and so I love that moral gray areas and ambiguity, and that's correct. Yeah, there we go. Yep, I like the episode. Yeah, with Willem, exactly, Peter. But yeah, I really like this one again. If it's like you know, is it the ends justify the means? Like there is a changeling, but there's also billions of people on Earth, and there's one changeling or two. Actually, there's two changelings. So you know, and of course this is season 4. So this is like 93, 93, 94, 94, 95, 95, 96, 96, 97, around there, quite a few years before 9/11 and the Patriot Act. Um, you know what I mean? Like it's kind of ahead of its time in some ways. And that's another thing I think about Deep Space Nine a lot. It is ahead of its time, especially because it ended in 99 and 9/11 happened in 2001. So if you go back and watch it, you might think, oh, this must be some post 9/11 thing, but no, it happened in the middle to late 90s. So it's really like, again, pretty seminal in that way. Number 4, I'm going to get into 2 episodes here that center around Nog. And Nog is one of those characters, again, a Ferengi, who really begins the series with Jake as a very precocious, annoying adolescent weasel, very annoying, very rambunctious, you know, responsible for vandalism in the first few seasons. He's a bad influence on Jake Sisko, which is one of the reasons why Keiko decides to have a school um, put in on the station. So at least Jake and Nog and some other kids can do something all day, so they're not running around. Also, self-sealing stem bolts. If you guys know the self-sealing stem bolts episode, that's one that I think is interesting. It's not on this list, but I do think it's an interesting one. So this episode is called "The Siege of AR-558." It's from season 7, episode 8, and this is the Dominion War now. So Captain Sisko and his away team volunteered to stay with a besieged unit at an isolated outpost. This is the time. This is the part of the Dominion War where the Federation is kind of losing. It starts off. I think it's this episode. Excuse me, it's not this episode. I was thinking of something that I'll refer to later. Pardon me. But in this episode, the Defiant is going around to the perimeter, to the front lines, essentially, of all these different star systems and planets and so forth. And there happens to be this AR-558, which is just an outpost that's on the front lines between the Federation space and Cardassian space, and they have been besieged. I think by the actually maybe by the Jem'Hadar, and by the who are part of the Dominion, and they go down there to give equipment and stuff to the remaining people that are there. I think they say they started off with like a couple hundred people or something, and now they're down to more than half, and the commanders are gone, and so there's just a small group of soldiers. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's one of the few times in Star Trek where they reference that they do have like an army and a Marine Corps, like the Starfleet Army. Starfleet's like the Navy, of course, but or maybe you could even say the Air Force, but they do have ground forces. And if I'm not mistaken, I think the gentlemen that they're with, some of them are part of Starfleet, but some of them I think are ground forces soldiers. Again, if I'm not mistaken. One of the gentlemen who's actually makes a guest appearance in this episode is Bill Mummy, who you'll know if you're a Twilight Zone fan. He was in 3 episodes of the Twilight Zone. He was also Will. Was it Will in Lost in Space? He's the boy, the little boy from Lost in Space. So he's in this one, and this is very famous for Nog here, who's laying on, I guess, like on a stretcher. He gets his leg shot off or blown off um, by a Jem'Hadar warrior soldier, and so he becomes, a war amputee. He loses his leg, and it's a very, again, a very like episode where at this point, Nog goes from that precocious, you know, I mean, maybe precocious is not even the word, very annoying, young person who's, I guess, supposed to be a tween or something. And throughout the series, he actually wants to join Starfleet, which he does. And the little green men is when they're being transported to Earth. And anyway, he goes to Earth with his uncle and Quark, with his father, who's Rom, and his uncle Quark, and they have their hijinks. But it's wartime, so many of the cadets have to then serve as provisional ranks, and so he becomes an ensign and gets assigned to the Defiant as I think probably their security tactical officer, something like this. And again, because he's part of the Defiant crew and he's on Deep Space Nine, he's involved in this attack and loses his leg. So it's like very, very one of those things where like, oh man, like I I didn't like this little annoying kid before, but now like now I kind of do feel sorry for him. Like I just I don't know. Only the lower part of his leg, yeah, from the knee. Okay, from the knee down. Thank you, Peter. Yeah, but like I didn't really like this. This is really annoying, and then you're like, now you feel kind of bad for him and stuff. And so, anyway, it's very interesting. So he gets his part of his knee, part of his leg blown off. And it's a very action-packed kind of war, like it's like a war movie type of thing. The soldiers all have PTSD. They've been on there for such a long time. They're tired, and then they end up getting reinforced. But it also shows some of these smaller units that the Federation kind of have a tough time trying to control. The next episode, I think, goes hand in glove with the siege of AR 558. Excuse me, which is it's only a paper moon. Just 2 episodes later, so season 7, episode 10. In this episode, Nog comes back from the hospital from Starfleet Medical, and he's obviously different. He's not as enthusiastic. His attitude has definitely changed. He's more dour. He walks around with a cane, even though his leg has been fixed. He's got, I think, an artificial limb, something like this. But he's different. He's dour. He moves in with Jake, and he's very angry and so forth. And people are not really sure what to do with him. So one night he goes to the holosuites, and I'll read the description here. It says, severely depressed at his serious war wound, Nog retreats into Vic Fontaine's holosuite program while the singer tries to help him. So in season 7, we're introduced to Vic Fontaine, played by Bobby Darin, who passed away recently. And unfortunately, so did the actor who played Nog, played by Aaron Eisenberg, who is incredible, by the way, in both episodes. But this in particular, this is just unbelievable performance here. So he goes to the holosuite, and he just wants Vic, who's kind of a Frank Sinatra type, to sing for him because Frank is a resident at a sort of a Las Vegas hotel in the 1960s. So again, kind of like a Sinatra type. And eventually, Noggs stays in the holosuite and like helps Vic out with his hotel and his business and so forth. During this time, it also should also be noted is the addition of Esri Dax, who takes over at the last season from Jadzia Dax, who was killed at the end of season 6. Spoiler alert. Um, and Esri Dax is the counselor, so she is trying to console and counsel Nog and says, "Well, maybe it's a good thing." So Nog gets sort of lost in this program. Um, this leads to him shoving Jake and getting very angry, and it leads to this scene when the holosuites is terminated, where he's crying and he's saying he doesn't think he can go on. And again, you kind of feel bad. Let me tell you, when I got to this episode, I was like, damn, now I feel bad that I absolutely hated Nog because there's something more inside there. And this is the one thing about having a series like this where it's multiple seasons. There's 172 episodes, I think. And, there's character growth, there's maturity, there's all these things. And this scene in particular, where he's crying and he's saying, I don't think I can do it, and whatever, it's very, very powerful. And, bittersweet that Aaron Eisenberg passed away. He did say before that he passed away and throughout the years that when he would go to comic book conventions or Star Trek conventions, veterans, particularly American veterans of many wars from Vietnam through to Iraq and Afghanistan, would say to him, thank you for your "It's Only a Paper Moon" and for the Siege. This one, AR-558. Like he would get veterans saying, like, I understood. It was very powerful. And again, it's a sci-fi series. There's no Dominion, there's no war, there's no spaceships, there's no Ferengi, and yet the writing transcends this everything. The historical um, analogies, the metaphors, the fact that it touched many veterans' lives, and that's really one thing that Aaron is going to be known for and is still known for. I believe he passed away in 2019. But yeah, his absolute, I think, best performance, hands down. And again, the lasting legacy of having veterans come to him and tell him that, they understood what Nog was going through, really made him and his life, I think, a lot more whole because of that. And this is why, we're here talking about Star Trek, is because of things like this that again that transcend some of these on the surface things that can look absurd. And that will continue into the next couple slides, particularly my number one slide. But let's go on to number two. So It's Only a Paper Moon. It's one of these things, if you haven't seen this episode in a while, like this one's more where you kind of have to have a little bit of background on who Nog is and the war and stuff. So, not really an episode I would share with someone brand new. But if you are out there, or anyone out there in my audience, if you haven't seen this one for a while, yeah, again, it's very touching and it's very, very well written and well performed. The next one, um, I have to highlight one of there were many reoccurring characters like Nog, like Rom, and others in Star Trek Deep Space Nine who were not officially part of the main cast, but who were memorable for many reasons, like Mark Alimo playing Gul Dukat. Um, but I have to mention Elon Garrett because he is played by Andrew Robinson, who is amazing. Um, it's one of those things where when the writing and the performances go together, it's like smooth. It's like syrup on glass. You know what I mean? It's like the smoothest thing ever. Okay. Um, it it he's perfect in the role. His character is so good. And this to me, there's many of them. He's very important, by the way, which I love the fact that they included him at the end of the show. Uh, Spoiler alert: the Cardassians turn on the Dominion, and Elon Garrick is one of the reasons why that happens at the very end of the entire show. But in this one, this is a very famous episode. This is called "In the Pale Moonlight." This is from season 6, episode 19. The IMDb description says, to save the Federation in a critical scheme, Sisko comes to realize that he must violate its fundamental principles to do so. And I've given you here a photo of Garrick. In this episode, it's a very rare episode where a character breaks the fourth wall. So in this episode, it's really Benjamin Sisko narrating the events of I guess the past couple days, in which he's in his quarters and he's looking directly at the camera and saying, I knew I shouldn't have, done this, but I did it anyway, and then Gareth and so forth. And so we know that in this episode, we've established that Gareth is a Cardassian who is left on the station. He chooses to stay, I should say, on Deep Space Nine after its transition from Cardassian to Federation in order to run a tailor's shop, a dress and suit shop, which many of the characters will go to in the future. And of course, we know that Garrick will say, I'm just a plain, simple tailor. I love it. I love it. He's the best. He develops a relationship with Bashir that a lot of people have called possibly uh, gay relationship or something like this, which again is also adds a very interesting dynamic. Um, who knows? But it is interesting. And the plain old simple tailor, Garrick, in this episode, um, Captain Sisko wants to uh, construct a plan on how to get the Romulans into the Dominion War and to fight alongside the Federation and the Klingons because the war is not going very well for the Federation of the Klingons and their allies. So he hires Garrick. He asks Garrick, I should say, for some assistance. Garrick hires, of course, because he knows he's got connections to the underworld. He hires a gentleman, I guess a technologist kind of person, to create a holosuite recording, rather, not an actual holosuite program, but a recording of the highest ranked kind of Tal Shiar intelligence members and so forth in the Romulan Federation, or the Romulan, whatever they're called, Empire, Romulan Star Empire, in a meeting where they are saying that they're going to invade Cardassia, what they're going to do with Cardassia after they invade Cardassia. And so, or excuse me, I should say it's the other way around. Forgive me. Forgive me. He he records the program of Cardassians, of high-ranking Cardassians, saying that they're going to invade Romulan space. Anyways, forgive me on that. So it's the reverse. So in this holo recording, it's people like Gul Dukat and so forth, and they're saying, hey, we're going to invade Romulus, and this is what we're going to do after that, and so forth. So again, the whole point is it is a fake, but what's going to happen is there's a Romulan ambassador who's going to come to Deep Space Nine, which he does, played by Scott McHattie. You've seen him before. You can Google him. And Sisko, they go to the holosuite, they play this, fake recording, and in the end, the ambassador guy, he finds out that it's a fake, and that's the very famous It's a fake. I love it. I love it. Gareth ends up placing a bomb on that guy's ship, blows him up. So there's no witnesses, and he also kills his alien friend guy who made the recording. And when Cisco learns about this, he beelines very aggressively into Garrick's shop, and they have a fisticuffs fight. I should say, well, I should say that that Cisco punches, Garrett, and he's got that line, and I'm going to butcher it, but it's like just to think. He says something like, "The Romulans are now in the war, and all it cost was, one Romulan ambassador, one criminal, and the self-respect of one Starfleet officer." And he says like, "I think that's a good trade or something." And it's so good. It's so good. It's just like it's such an amazing, and it's a very, very much the moral gray area because, of course, the Romulans do join the war, and they end up winning the war. Spoiler alert! In the next season, with the Romulans' help. Um, so it's all based on a lie, but there's no one there to be able to investigate because the rod was on the ship that blew up with the ambassador guy on it. So if they recover this recording on this rod, it'll be too damaged. And then the guy who made the rod, well, Garrick took care of him. And again, it's like, this is when Cisco says, "I am not Picard" to Q in earlier episodes. This really is solidifies that. Hey, there we go. Let me see here. Okay, so the only lower part, oh, right, part of his knee. Thank you. We're just going to go to number one in just a moment. So I just want to go through some comments here. Annoying only because he was a product of his culture. Very true. Very, very true. Yeah, Ferengis tend to be that way, but of course, Nog did grow quite a bit. It's hard to see Nog go through this angst, but I like the way he decided to get better. Excuse me. Yeah, very. In the end, of course, through that episode, he again he decides not to go through with staying in the holosuites all the time, and gets help. Someone once asked me if I actually like Deep Space Nine, and I said no, I love it. Yeah, amen. Same here. I made it. Did you talk about my intergalactic girlfriend, Jedzia? We've talked about Jedzia. Jedzia is amazing. Not yet, but I named my kittens Dax. He's a boy, but Dax wasn't always a female. Very true. I have a girl crush on her too. All right. Number one, I don't think any of you, I'm sure if you were to roll some dice, and if you know me, you know it's my favorite episode. I'm going to talk about this one. I love this episode, guys. It's Duet, season one, episode 19. So going back and talking about how I only watched sporadic episodes, mostly when I was a teenager and into my 20s. I never watched this episode until that year of 2011 when I binged the whole series. And season one, let's be honest, of most Star Trek shows, not the best. Season one of the Next Generation is not great. It's got some okay stuff, but it certainly gets better. Deep Space Nine, season one, not too great. It's just it is what it is. And I never seen this episode before, so you imagine my surprise when just before the first season ends, and this is Duet, season one, episode 19. The description says a Cardassian suffering from Kalanora, a disease that indicates he served in a labor camp, visits Deep Space Nine, and Kira is determined to convict him as a war criminal. So I watched this episode, and I mean, my jaw was on the floor because, again, season one is kind of up and down. They have some pretty bad episodes, some pretty boring episodes. They're trying their best, of course, but this one comes along, and oh my god, the way this one turned out is just incredible. It's in my top three favorite Star Trek episodes across the entire franchise. It has my two most best performances of any actors in Star Trek, which is with Kira and the gentleman who I'm going to mention in just a moment on the right here. It is incredibly analogous to events of the Holocaust and concentration camps, Nazi hunting and justice and all these types of things. So if you haven't seen Duet, and again, I don't know if this is something I have shown this one to actual people who aren't Star Trek fans and said to them, imagine this is like a play, kind of got the heavy Star Trek stuff that's in it. Okay, I'll tell. Okay, here are the Bajorans and here are the Cardassians. You just got to know that they're they have beef together, and because it comes so early, this is a really good introduction to people if you want to wet their whistle, so to speak, to get into Deep Space Nine. I think it will blow a lot of minds if you do that. Again, you got to get through 18 episodes, but when this one hits, it's remarkable. So in this particular episode, so we have the gentleman here in the photo on the right. Now, this actor, his name is Harris Yulin. He's been in a lot of stuff. He has a very long career. He was in Clear and Present Danger. I was just watching The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. He's in that. And most recently, he was in the first season of Netflix's Ozark, in which he played the father of Laura Linney's character. He's been around. He's done tons of TV. He's done tons of movies. Veteran actor. I think he's in his 80s, late 80s now. Anyway, wonderful, wonderful. You can see with the makeup, he's playing a Cardassian. So in this episode, this gentleman arrives at Deep Space Nine, and there's a previous medical examination that says that he suffers from Kalanora and he needs treatment. It's very sci-fi. This is what we might call a MacGuffin, where it's very, very sci-fi because Kalanora is a disease that could have only had been contracted had he been at what is called the Galatep labor camp, very analogous to a concentration camp, which had a mining accident and there was some radiation. And Kalanora is the disease that comes from this specific planet on that specific location at a very specific time. He says, no, I have another syndrome. It's very similar, but it's not Kalanora. Well, Kira, excuse me, just so happened, pardon me, just so happened to have been part of a movement that liberated the Galatep labor camp. And she recognizes this man as a man named Gul Darheel, who was, to use a term, the commandant of the Galatep labor camp, who is considered to be a butcher and who um, has never been brought to justice. So you can imagine this guy comes to station. He has been told that he has Kalanora syndrome. He says, no, it's another syndrome. He says, you look like Gul Darheel. He says, no. He says, I'm not. That's not me. Comes out that in the end, this gentleman, through a series of incredible dialogues and between Nana Visitor and Harris Yulin, one of the most incredible episodes ever written, I think, in Star Trek, is that this gentleman is actually a man named Maritza, who was the file clerk for uh, for the Gul, for Gul Darheel, and he has surgically altered himself to look like Gul Darheel So then Gul Darhil will then be arrested by the Bajorans and executed. So that way there'll be some form of justice. And again, these allegories to, the concentration camps, Nazis liberating, the fact that this kind of reminds me a little bit of how certain high-ranking Nazis like Adolf Eichmann and Joseph Mengele were found by Simon Wiesenthal, the Simon Wiesenthal Center and Mossad, which is of course, the Israeli intelligence agency, found in South America in the 1960s, 1970s, living in places like Paraguay, Argentina, and then they were brought to justice. But this added thing of it's not so typical, like this added idea that he's not the butcher of Galatep, as they call him. He's the file clerk, and he wants to physically alter himself. So the Bajorans, who are going through a transition, will get justice. And again, I'm going to say this again. It's what I love about Star Trek. This is absurd. It's absurd when you think about it. When we really try to think about it, like, it's called suspending your disbelief. If we don't suspend our disbelief, there's a bunch of people with makeup, in rooms talking about historical analogies to the Holocaust. It shouldn't make any sense, and yet it is so unbelievably brilliant and exciting and just a masterpiece of episodes. And I just really love this one. It's no surprise I talked about it with Marilyn, as I mentioned before, when we did the Deep Space Nine talk about a year and a half ago. But anyway, I just love this episode. It's just really, really, just a really great one. Anyway, um, so those are my top 10. So let's go back and just do a review here. So for number 10, Nora the Battle to the Strong. 9, The Magnificent Ferengi. 8 is the Maquis Part 1 and 2. 7, Far Beyond the Stars. 6, Hard Time. 5 is Homefront Paradise Lost. 4 is The Siege of AR-558. 3 is It's Only a Paper Moon. 2 is Into Pale Moonlight. And 1 is Duet. So again, just before we conclude for tonight's show, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you so much. I know we have a lot of Star Trek fans. Please leave your comments on some of your own favorites on this video. I'd love to hear. There's a lot of episodes, like the What We Leave Behind and the finale, and a lot of stuff that I just couldn't add because of time, and so forth, because it's only 10. As I said, my honorables mentions would have been another 20 episodes or more. So unfortunately, I couldn't do that. The Visitors, another one. In the Hands of the Prophets is another one. There's just so many of them that I really do love and I really do enjoy. So I hope you enjoyed it. Please, again, if you have not subscribed to my channel and you are a fan of like Star Trek, if you also like kind of deeper subjects, pop culture subjects, I do a lot about history. Please consider subscribing to my channel. I also have a membership, and I do also accept super chats as well. Just got to that place. I'm almost right now at 1,200 subscribers, and I'm moving along, getting more attention, which I think is really great. If you haven't yet liked this video, please give this video a like. It really helps. And again, to all the Star Trek fans out there, I really am looking forward to hearing some of your favorite episodes. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I think April, at least the first couple weeks of April, might be a little busy. So I'm not 100% sure if I'll be able to do to do any lives in the next couple of weeks. But I will 100% let all of you know on the community tab or the posts tab. Now it's called posts tab, where I make my announcements, and I will make them, far ahead of time. I do also want to say that by the end of the month and early next month, I'm going to be able to do more content. I don't know what that's going to look like as of right now. I might return to the original schedule, might play around with some different, things, but I'd like to try to go back very soon to doing our, two streams a week. I think that was a really good thing. Someone couldn't make, a weekday, you can make a weekend, you can make the weekend, you make a weekday, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that worked out pretty well. So I'm going to get back onto that schedule hopefully soon. Shouldn't be too much longer. But again, thank you everyone for being here. Power Lines, Irish Mart, One with Cats, Peter Anderson, Clearwater Chat, and again, thanks for everyone who's watching on the replay. I really do appreciate your support. I really do appreciate all of the watch hours, which again, I also have now playlists that you can go on. I also hope to be back with Marilyn Honing soon, and I'm gonna, be reaching out to more creators in our space to talk about more things. It's just going to take a couple of weeks, so I know that you all have been patient with me. I thank you for that so much. And in case I don't see you, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.